Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I have a question for you. Has anyone ever been in a really bad hailstorm? I'm just wondering. Anybody? How bad? I mean, how big were the hailstones? Big? Enough to dent a car, do you think? No? Anybody with like real big, I mean, I've heard of hailstorms that are like as big as a grapefruit. Anyone ever see grapefruit-sized hailstones? I have never seen, tangerine, maybe a plum. But, the reason I mention it is that I want to talk with you about one of the particular plagues today that really caught my attention, and from it we're going to derive a lesson, and here's the lesson, and I'll explain it as we go along. Ready? Pay attention to that voice. Pay attention to that voice. Now, what am I saying? Well, first of all, you know about the plagues, and you know that they actually, at a lesser scale and not at the command of anybody, a lot of the plagues, the first 5, were rather common things in the land of Egypt between roughly September and then March, April. So, God uses natural things and soups them up and gives them qualities that are unmistakably supernatural, so that there's always room. If you want to be a skeptic and you're just determined, you'll find a way out. But if you're an honest person and thinking through how absolutely improbable the things occurred exactly when Moses said them, okay, and in an ascending order of severity all the way to the end. So there's a clear supernatural dimension here, no question, but a lot of it had to do with the amazing timing of what's going on. Moses says it's going to happen, boom, it happens. Now, I don't want to take the time to go through the first five, but it is really amazing how that works itself out. So Pharaoh, you know the story, Pharaoh kept changing his mind. And initially wasn't interested at all, but then because of the economic disaster that was occurring in his country, and also the sheer discomfort. I mean, frogs. We have a whole shtick that Kermit does about how his family was invited, amazingly, I don't know how they knew, 100,000 of his cousins and relatives ended up at a family reunion in Egypt at the time, and you could ask Kermit about that. You have this contest, and really it's a contest between the God of Israel and the phony gods of Egypt. And again, we don't have time to get into that this morning. But I want to focus on this 8th plague, and this is a hailstorm of such note and such severity that amazing things happen. So I'm going to read to you, and if you'd like to follow along, we're in the book of Exodus chapter 9. Behold, about this time tomorrow, Moses says, I will cause very heavy hail to fall, such has never been in Egypt, never from the day it was founded until now. So we're talking major hailstorm here. Now therefore, get your livestock and all that you have in the field to safe shelter, for every man and beast that is in the field and is not brought home will die when the hail falls on them. So we are talking about a very, very severe hailstorm. There were hailstorms in Egypt. We know about that. It wasn't totally unheard of, but the severity and the fact that it happens at the time, that's the point. Now, what I want you to notice, because again, our message today is all about this critical thing for living. We all need to learn this. Pay attention to that voice. That's what we're talking about, okay? So, then it says this, then whoever feared the Lord, the word of the Lord, among the servants of Pharaoh, hurried his slaves and his livestock into the houses. But whoever did not pay attention to the word of the Lord left his slaves and his livestock in the field. Now this is so interesting. You have some of Pharaoh's servants, some of his people saying, look, we know the government line here, but frankly, we've seen disaster after disaster, as this Moses has called upon his God and all of the destruction that's come upon us, and we're not paying attention anymore. He said, get out of the way. We're bringing everybody inside. And so there was a split among the people of Egypt. Pharaoh, and maybe a majority, it doesn't say a minority or majority, a lot of his people said, we're just not paying attention. We've got the animals have to do their work, the slaves have to do their work, and they left them in the fields, agrarian society, you know. But some of the people said, we are taking this very seriously. They paid attention, they heard and paid attention. They listened to that word. Very, very important. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven, so that there may be hail in the land of Egypt, on man and beast and every plant in the field in the land of Egypt. Then Moses stretched out his staff toward heaven, and the Lord sent thunder and hail and fire, obviously lightning that came down on the earth. And the Lord rained hail upon the land of Egypt, and there was hail and fire flashing continually, like a lightning storm that didn't let up. Truly amazing. And heavy hail such that has never been. The hail struck down everything that was in the field in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And the hail struck down every plant in the field and broke every tree in the field. Now notice this. Here's one of those amazing elements. Call it supernatural, call it providential. Either way, it's God. Listen to this. This is really great. Only in the land of Goshen, where the people of Israel were, there was no hail. Isn't that interesting? You see? It was one of those things. And of course, what we'd call the meta-communication, the message that was lied behind this hail and the location of where it fell and didn't was, you got to follow the right God, because I'm the only God who can do these kind of things, and I'm protecting my people. And so that's what was going on there. Then Pharaoh sent and called Moses and Aaron and said to them, this time I've sinned. Okay, the Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong. I give up. I'm watching my whole country fall apart. We're an agricultural country. The whole crop is ruined, and we'll talk more about this particular crops in a minute. And I and my people have been in the wrong. Plead with the Lord that there has been enough of God's thunder and hail. I will let you go, and you shall stay no longer. Go, get out. Moses said to him, well, as soon as I have gone out of the city, I will stretch out my hands to the Lord, and the thunder will cease, and there will be no more hail, so that you may know that the earth is the Lord's. But notice this. Moses says, but as for you and your servants, I know that you do not fear the Lord your God yet. So he knew that this was, again, one of those temporary, momentary turnings that didn't have any real substance to it. Now, here's an interesting comment in the scripture that I love, and I hope you will too. It says, parenthetically, the flax and the barley were struck down, for the barley was in the ear, and the flax was in bud. But the wheat and the emmer will not struck down, for they are late in coming up. Now you may say that's rather an extraneous comment. Why talk about, some agricultural details? Well, what's so interesting is we have pictures from around the time of the Exodus and from a particular place in Egypt, roughly 13th, 14th century, which showed that, in fact, flax and the barley were struck down. But no, so it's flax and barley were in adjacent fields, and that's a detail that fits the 14th century at the time of the Exodus. And it's just a little detail, but it again gives us this, I'm big on this, that we're talking about real things. Now we recognize that even apart from the historicity and the historical truthfulness, there still can be value as spiritual lessons. But spiritual lessons apart from on-the-ground reality lose a lot of their punch. This real stuff that really happened, the stuff we're reading about is real. and it really happened. There was really a Moses, really an Aaron, really the right Pharaoh that happened this to, etc. And then there's an excellent comment here by a scholar. As Hofmeier notes in his book, Israel and Egypt, the above verses in the book of Exodus, the writer had an excellent knowledge of the Egyptian agricultural calendar, since paintings from the blah, blah, blah place, and hard to pronounce, in Egypt, mid-14th century, depict the harvesting of barley, the pulling of flax occupying adjacent fields, thus demonstrating that barley and flax matured together in ancient Egypt, as stated in the book. So we see these kind of historical references that give power and punch to the spiritual lessons. I want to say one thing parenthetically too. We wonder why it is that in America, both in Christian denominations and in Jewish denominations, roughly half the people have left their congregations over the past generation or so. UCC, United Methodists, Presbyterians, Conservative and Reform Judaism. Well, obviously there's no one simple answer that can account for all of it, but I want to suggest that part of the reason, and maybe a majority of it, is that ministers and rabbis became so detached and skeptical about the on-the-ground truthfulness of the things that they were teaching, that people then kind of over time said to themselves, why knock myself out and give money and my time and my attention and my heart when a lot of these things, as far as I'm concerned, from what the guy's saying up there, could be fairy tales and have no basis in reality? Who knows? Maybe Moses wasn't a Moses. Maybe there was no David, etc. Now, these things aren't normally articulated by average folks, but they're felt. And I think that the denominations have suffered terribly in part because of a profound skepticism, because the leadership imagined that spiritual lessons and moral teachings can be detached from the claims that are being made in the book that has carried us for centuries. And so, end of parentheses, but it's a big deal as far as I'm concerned. So Moses went out of the city, and Pharaoh, and stretched out his hands to the Lord, and the thunder and the hail ceased, and the rain no longer poured upon the earth. But when Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail and the thunder had ceased, he sinned yet again. This guy has a short memory. He sinned yet again and hardened his heart. He and his servants, so the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he did not let the people of Israel go, just as the Lord had spoken. We're talking about Pharaoh's reaction to the voice. Now, what do I mean, the voice? In this case, it's the voice of God through Moses. He didn't pay deep attention to the voice. And what I'm saying is, we need to pay attention to the voice. Maybe if he was here, he'd say, you guys, you Messianic Jews, let's imagine we had Pharaoh here. He's got his outfit on, his skirt, his whole thing with the thing. And he says, you're so tough on me. Do you know how hard it is to be Pharaoh? Do you think all I did was wait around for Moses to come along and be mean to him? I got trouble at home. I got trouble with the Ethiopians. Heavy lies the crown. Don't you all know that? Say to him, Pharaoh, your life is tough and busy, life of leadership hard. And in ancient times, believe me, lots of people would kill you and want to take your throne. People who feigned loyalty to you, we understand, but you missed the voice. You missed the most important thing. You allowed other considerations to blind you to what was really happening unmistakably, because you lived through it and you saw it, and the end was disaster. Okay. So it's not enough they had a tough day. We all have tough days. We get that. So we're talking about listening to the voice. So let's bring this to our lives. There are things that we hear the voice saying, and I'm not going to define the voice in terms of what exactly it is. It's not necessary. You all know what I'm talking about at an intuitive level. We're talking about the voice. And you should take vitamin D3. You've heard it a dozen times, but you haven't done it. And the voice keeps coming to you saying, you should take vitamin D3. It's universally shown to be a tremendous anti-carcinogen, helpful against the effects of COVID. You know this, and you don't do it. This is not just you. This is us. We don't listen to the voice. but we should listen to the voice. It's learning to listen to the voice. Here's a more important one. And this relates very much to things that Rabbi Nathan talks to us about in terms of relational dynamics. You know you need to make the phone call, but you keep resisting. Rabbi Rich, what phone call? I don't know what phone call. You know what phone call. To a mother, to a father, to a friend, to a coworker. You know you should make the phone call. The voice keeps saying to you, make the phone call. But you don't. And you just ignore the phone call, and you ignore the voice. Listen, I'll tell you, I had a situation like this just this week. I don't want to get into too much detail. It doesn't involve anyone at Ruach, but I was involved in one of my many ministry activities, and there was a person who I wronged. Now, it wasn't, objectively speaking, it wasn't all that terrible. It was a misjudgment on my part. I knew, though, that the right thing to do was to make the phone call, or in this case, to send the email. I resisted it. I didn't want to. I said to myself, look, I had reason for doing what I did in this particular circumstance. And the voice kept saying, make the phone call. I said, but I don't want to make the phone call, because I was mad about this particular thing. Not over the top mad, but just a little mad. And the voice was make the phone call. Or not, in this case, phone call that was right, because the person lives elsewhere in another country. You know what I did? I sent the email. Boy, did that feel good once I did it. Do you know what I'm talking about? I mean, is this just me? No. It's you. It's me. As soon as I did, a weight lifted off my shoulders, and good fruit came from it immediately. You never know the positive effect of making the phone call or the whatever form of communication. You never know what kind of long-range impact that gesture can have. And it doesn't have to be because you did something wrong. I'm just saying, pay attention to the voice. That's what I'm saying. Sometimes we don't pay attention to the voice. Do you know the dilemma of the almond croissant? This is a major world problem. The almond croissant. I'm just curious for me, how many of you love almond croissants? Can I see? I'm seeing a lot of hands. Some of you don't. That's fine. I love them. I'm always bugged when there isn't that nice stuff inside the almond paste. You ever get a dry almond croissant? You know? No fun. But I've told myself, because I tend to eat too many of them in the winter because you want comfort food. Don't you want comfort food in the winter? You want, and you want to feel good, and you feel, And the other day, I've had victories and I've had failures. The voice said, don't get the almond croissant. By all means, have the coffee. But don't get the almond croissant, because you can't, if you eat almond croissants, really, it's not going to be good. What do you think I did? Bought the almond croissant, ate it with alacrity, and ignored the voice. Well, there's voices that are not, it's not world-shattering. But this is us, and this is not just me, it's all of us. Okay. So, a quote from Rabbi Sachs, Jonathan Sachs, not a follower of Yeshua, but a really smart guy who has a lot of good things to say. Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory, he passed away recently, former chief rabbi of England. Very interesting comment we'll take apart. In shame cultures, what matters is what other people think of you. The embarrassment, the ignominy, the loss of face. Whereas in guilt cultures, it's what the inner voice of conscience tells you. In shame cultures, we're actors playing our part in a public stage. In guilt cultures, we're engaged in inner conversation with the better angels of our nature. That's from his book, The Power of Ideas. Now, I'm not wild about speaking positively of guilt cultures. But, and the particular religious culture that we've developed doesn't like that word. But I think what Rabbi Sachs means is that you judge yourself by an external standard that's bigger than you, and if you don't keep it, you feel guilty, and that's not bad if it moves you to positive action. We understand sometimes guilt can be immobilizing. He would understand that, but he's making a point here in a literary kind of way. But shame cultures, he says, is very different. There, it's not the inner voice of goodness saying, here's what you should do. It's rather this feeling of, I'm a performer, I'm out of touch with the real me, I'm not really in touch with God very much. In fact, I'm not hearing much of any voice at all, except the voice of my own reactions to my public, how the public may feel about me. It's a real danger. I think it's a profound insight. But Yeshua put it this way, and this is from the Sorah passage, and we'll finish up with this soon. Be aware of the log in your own eye before externalizing your inner discomfort by focusing on the deficiencies of others. That's kind of a revised version of what he says in the Besorah. Look at the log in your own eye. We could call it, or could express it this way, listen to the voice. Stop blocking the voice by endless preoccupation with how bad others are and how you're better than them. But listen to the voice, because the voice is going to tell you about the log in your own eye, and you don't have to live in this mode of constant comparison. It's not where to live, as Rabbi Sachs reminds us. So I do want to say, you have to handle this sermon that I'm giving today with care. Because it's possible to be so motivated by guilt and a sense of inadequacy, and many religious people suffer from this. Look, you can't do everything. You can't get it right all the time. You can't change everything. Very important. And it's not always your fault. I had to say that because I think the sensitive conscience before God can take things too far and live in a state that is not what God, certainly not in a state of joy that God would have for us. Now listen, sometimes we need the help of trusted others to help us to discern if the voice is the right voice. But don't act like Pharaoh. Listen to the voice. You'll be a better person. You'll make fewer mistakes. You'll feel a lot happier and lighter. And that's what God would have for all of us. I didn't tell you the source of the voice. You know the source of the voice. How it's mediated through conscience and what culture is another matter, not important. Listen to the voice, and you will have a much happier and better and productive life than if you didn't listen to the voice. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.